As many as 800 Israelis have been murdered, maybe up to 3,000 have been injured, and about 100 have been kidnapped into Gaza. Israel is reeling right now. Here's the latest. Take a look.
48 hours after Hamas's invasion on October 7th, the IDF says it has regained control of all the towns on the Gaza border, while Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has ordered a complete siege of the Gaza Strip. Following the invasion, the numbers are staggering. More than 4,000 rockets fired into Israel, as many as 800 Israelis murdered, almost 3,000 injured, many seriously, and up to 100 kidnapped and taken into captivity in Gaza. The images, horrifying. Armed terrorists roaming Israeli communities at will and murdering anyone in sight. Elderly women and men dead on the street. Whole families inside their homes slaughtered, with more than 200 killed at an outdoor dance festival. The atrocities reminiscent of ISIS. Bodies of the dead being desecrated in the streets of Gaza. A captured 85-year-old grandmother with dementia being mocked in this photo. This 7-year-old boy being tormented by young Gazan boys with a whip. A 1-year-old being toyed with by this Hamas terrorist. And this Israeli woman named Noah kidnapped at a concert. Her fiancé dragged along, and her father in anguish. Israel is now on a war footing, with up to 300,000 reservists called up to action. Many anticipate a ground incursion into Gaza soon, with the likely goal the destruction of the Iranian-backed terror group.
Now, for us, it's a time to get organized and to get prepared for the attack against the militia of Hamas. And I call the Prime Minister to take a different approach. We have to eradicate Hamas, period.
The Wall Street Journal is reporting Iran worked directly with Hamas to plot and plan the invasion, while a Hamas spokesman thanked Iran for its support. Major questions do remain. How did this colossal intelligence failure happen? Will Hezbollah enter the war? Regardless of those answers, Israel now finds itself in a new era.
This is a paradigm shift for Israel. The Prime Minister, the cabinet, the heads of the military, it's clear to everybody that for an attack to be carried out against the Israeli people, we're in a new world, a new region, and our response will be unlimited to what we're going to do to successfully carry out our mission. Whatever that means, all options are on the table.
Well, joining me now to talk more about this is Julie Stahl, CBN News correspondent. Julie, you were on a briefing this morning with the IDF spokesman. What did you learn from that?
Yeah, I learned that they're not saying a lot of things. Also that this is a whole different ballgame. They've never seen anything like this before, and things will never be the same. That's basically what they're saying. At that point, there was still 7 to 8 Israeli communities where there was fighting going on. That finished, but then there were Kfar Aza, I believe it was also invaded again by 2 terrorists. So it's kind of a fluid situation there. Also, we just kind of report that there were 3 rockets that landed kind of in the area around Jerusalem. In Beitar Illit, there were 7 wounded light, but there were also, it says, a direct hit on a mosque in Abu Ghosh. Abu Ghosh is not far outside Jerusalem. It's a place with great restaurants that Israelis love to go to, but it's an Arab town.
In fact, just a few minutes ago, we were listening out the window and heard the sirens.
Yep.
And then typically here, for people that want to know exactly how it works, you hear the sirens and then you wait for the booms. There were several booms, the Iron Dome intercepting those rockets, but sounds like tragically some of them landed here in the Jerusalem area.
Yeah.
So you've been interviewing, and we've been down on the Gaza border for many, many years, and we've interviewed many of the people down there. What have you been hearing from them?
Well, there was a woman that we interviewed, particularly about the security situation, maybe 7 years ago. Like in 2015 or 16, and she took us all around the border and showed us how they have a wall there and how the kids have to wait in a bomb shelter for the bus and all that kind of stuff. And their community was invaded. She said they're okay, but their neighbors were not. And all she would say was it was very, very, very bad.
What is the mood of Israelis right now? What are you hearing? What are you sensing about what they're feeling right now, 3 days after this unprecedented attack?
Yeah, it is unprecedented. I think people are they're upset, they're angry, they're afraid, they're confused. They just don't know what to make about this whole thing because it's not supposed to be this way. I mean, they've trusted in the army. They all serve in the army. So, it's something that everybody knows. It's like your family. And I think maybe some of them even feel betrayed or are really wondering what is going on. Why weren't there a better guarding system on the border, or what happened to the one that they had? And another lady that we had interviewed before about her bomb shelter, or about the bomb shelter that CBN had put in her community, she said they had to flee. She said the terrorists were in their community. It's a community of Yesha. They were firing at their house. They broke the windshield in their car, and the neighbors were not so lucky. There's 3 people or 4 people dead in the community, 3 dead and 4 wounded. So, I mean, it's really, and she's been evacuated to far north. She said they'll be there at least till Thursday, and then they don't know where they'll go.
Yeah, well, we hope that there's not an outbreak of conflict on the northern border. They would have to move even again. And I remember being down there in her home. It's a beautiful home. It's kind of chilling to think that there were terrorists there fighting, shooting randomly at their homes. Final question, Julie. Right now, in the first day or two, things seem so clear about what's happening. But one of the things that's going to happen is the information war and the obfuscation of muddling the area. What people need to know as they go forward, is this going to go from day 3 here to week 1 and week 2?
I think it's really, really important to remember how this whole thing began and who was the bad guy in the beginning, and not look at Israel's response, because the other side's going to use it as PR. Keep the facts in mind, like Hamas puts their military things in civilian areas for the purpose of the civilians getting killed, so that they have good PR. So, I mean, I think it's really important to remember a lot of things. Remember that Israel's been the one giving the people from Gaza jobs. Israel's been the one letting food across the border. Israel's electricity,
yeah,
fuel,
sure.
everything. You know, Israel's been, and even when Hamas fires rockets and stuff, and that's going to stop. And Israel's probably going to look like, oh, why are you doing this? It's so not humanitarian. And, you know, you got to draw a line somewhere.
Yeah. Well, we'll see that line is going to change pretty quickly. Thank you, Julie.
Yes, thanks.
Well, another commentator that's we've looked to for years for her perspective on what's happening here in Israel is Caroline Glick. So take a look at our interview with her. Caroline Glick, thanks for joining us. We've known each other for a long time, and we've done interviews in very difficult times for Israel, but I can't think of any other time like this dark day in Israel. Tell us how you're feeling personally and about... Caroline Glick, thanks for joining us. We've known each other for a long time, and we've done interviews in very difficult times for Israel, but I can't think of any other time like this dark day in Israel. Tell us how you're feeling personally and about your reaction to what happened yesterday and even going on today.
Well, Chris, you're right. We have been through a lot over the years that you've been here in Israel with us, and we faced a lot of tough spots, and this is definitely the toughest spot that we faced. The magnitude of the carnage and of the atrocities and of the monstrosity that we're being afflicted by from the Hamas regime in Gaza is something that even dwarfs ISIS's beheadings. We've seen some footage that is simply unspeakable in terms of abuse of children who are hostages to Hamas in Gaza, and the rape of women and other things, and the abuse of the bodies of our dead, among many other things, not to mention mass murder and slaughter, the likes of which we've simply never seen. The number of dead in one day here has risen to above 600, and it is expected to go above 1,000. And so obviously that's, given the difference in the population between Israel and the United States, that's more than 10 9/11s that we faced just in one day. And we're just at the beginning of a very long war, it looks like.
This seems like a watershed moment in Israel's history, Carolyn, like 1947, 48, 1967, 1973. Ironically, 50 years almost to the day after the Yom Kippur War surprise attack. Do you see we're living in a new era right now?
We had an experiment in trying to peacefully coexist with a terrorist state led by Hamas, a Muslim Brotherhood terrorist organization in Gaza at our border. And we entertained the idea that it's possible. It never really bore out at all. We've faced repeated campaigns that they've carried out against our country since they seized power in 2007. I think we're up to 6 different secret missile offensives and terror operations, terror campaigns that they've waged against us from Gaza since seizing power. And yesterday was the end of the delusion there too, that you simply cannot peacefully coexist with the Hamas regime. And the time we've spoken about it in the past amongst ourselves here in Israel, that we have to wipe out Hamas, that we have to reconquer Gaza, that we have to reassert control over Gaza, because there's no other way. We've spoken about it, but the step always seemed like it was too risky, or maybe we didn't have to. We have no choice now. At the end of the war, can see no more Hamas regime in Gaza, and no more Hamas fighters in Gaza. They all have to either be killed or expelled.
There's been talk of a possible unity government, an emergency unity government. Is that a possibility?
It's a possibility. We just have to see what that would involve. Obviously, there's a big advantage, especially after the civil unrest that we've faced at the hands of a very rebellious insurrectionist, even leftist elite that has been demonizing the entire state of Israel, really, since the right religious bloc won the last elections. So there's after coming out of this now into this horrible war, there's a lot to be said for a unity government. We'll just have to see what that would mean, because I think. I wouldn't oppose it personally, but it would really depend, because we're at a moment when the left's whole worldview has collapsed in a river of blood, and the sight of dead children and their parents and hostages in Gaza. And I think if there's a reckoning and there's an understanding on the part of the people who brought us this, who forced this worldview down our throats, that the time has come to take a different path, a path of decision, a path of victory, the path of annihilating our enemies. Unless they go ahead and continue annihilating us, I think it might be more trouble than it's worth.
You've been in the IDF as well, Carolyn. You've been analyzing and writing and speaking about Israel for many, many years. Tell us your final thoughts about what's going on, what's happened, and where we go from here.
We're in a place we've never been before. And Hamas tore up the rule book, such as it ever existed between us and this jihadist terror group, when they wantonly invaded our territory and massacred our civilians and our soldiers in a way that nobody ever imagined could happen, even though we probably should have. And so all bets are off. And I think that we have to worry now not about what the day after will look like. I think we have to worry about what Hamas will look like. And basically the way that Hamas needs to look when this is over is dead and done. And Hezbollah as well. We simply cannot allow a situation to continue where we have proxy terror armies of Iran at our borders in the north and in the south that pose the kind of strategic threat to Israel that they now pose. We simply cannot allow this to happen. We've been living on a chessboard deluding ourselves about what our possible moves are and what our enemies' possible moves are. All of the pieces on that chessboard have to be reorganized. A lot of them have to go, because if they don't, then we're going to face a situation as nightmarish as what we're experiencing today is, and it's an unspeakable nightmare.
I know a lot of Christians around the world are praying for Israel at this time, that it operates wisely and in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. God bless you all, and thank you for your prayers.
Thanks. Well, as you can see, we always like to talk to Caroline about her analysis of the situation. Another mind that we'd like to go to is Hananya Neftali. He's a social media advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Here's our interview with Hananya. Take a look. Hananya Neftali, thanks for joining us. You're an Israeli media influencer. You know, just the other day, we were marching in a very joyful time there through the streets of Jerusalem, the annual Jerusalem March during the Feast of Tabernacles. And then on the last day of the feast, this invasion by Hamas terrorists.
Wow, Chris, I have to say that we Israelis are in a state of shock, especially civilians, are trying to collect our thoughts. As I've heard several friends of mine saying whose family members are missing, saying, you know, it's still no time for mourning, no time for funerals. It's time to fight and to defend our country, because we are fighting for our survival. And what we basically saw is Hamas terrorists that infiltrated Israel took control of Israeli communities on the southern border. And while doing so, they slaughtered civilians, men, women, children. And those that they didn't slaughter, they kidnapped them. Again, men, women, children, elderly. And at the same time, they fired barrages of rockets on Israeli cities, including pretty much sending millions of us civilians to bomb shelters, including myself. So we had to run to bomb shelters. And the point here that I think the world needs to understand is that Israel is dealing with a murderous terrorist organization backed by Iran that seeks our annihilation. And you can see it with the numbers. In Israel, you have over 2 million Arabs. Majority of them are Muslims. In Gaza, you have 0 Jews. The only Jews that you would find in Gaza are the ones that are kidnapped.
Where do you think Israel goes from here?
We are right now heading towards definitely escalation. The people of Israel, and I'm sure the people outside of Israel, wouldn't like to see anything less than a full-on operation to put an end to this Hamas terrorist regime. For too long, we have allowed terrorist organizations to be our neighbors. Mm-hmm. We have to say no to that. No more. We have to fight back. We have always championed, being an Israeli soldier myself, we have always championed being the most moral army, the army that gives an advance note, a warning to civilians in Gaza before we destroy a terrorist target, so that there will be no civilian casualties. But I think that now is the time to fight back. And this Hamas terrorist organization does not care about not our civilians, not their civilians, the Palestinian people, and our war here is against the Hamas terrorist group, not people or civilians.
You know, Natalia, explain to people that are listening right now why and how wrenching this is going to be for any nation, but I think particularly for Israel. It's more like a family. So if one soldier is kidnapped and held hostage, everybody sort of feels that. But now, literally hundreds of people have been killed, and now dozens that are hostages inside Gaza. How heart-wrenching is that to Israelis?
I can't even describe how heartbreaking it is. I've since the morning, I'm in touch with friends of mine, including neighbors, that said that they have people that they lost touch with, and they don't know what's going on with them. The last contact that they had with them was about 24 hours ago. You can only imagine, just imagine if it was happening to your family, that you lose contact with your children, with your parents. Other friends of mine, they lost, a friend of mine lost his brother. He lost contact with him. He has no idea where he is, whether he's dead or whether he was kidnapped. This is how crazy this situation is in Israel. And I have to say, Krista, this is a war between good and evil. It's not just about victims and perpetrators. It has always been about good versus evil, because this radical ideology represented by Hamas is not limited to a border, but to a radical ideology that has no borders.
Yeah. Finally, Hananya, I know there are millions of evangelical Christians around the world who are now praying for Israel. How would you recommend that they be praying for Israel at this time?
First of all, I have to say that we Israelis are thankful for your continuous and strong support, because we need our friends today more than ever. And I say this putting this request all the way from here, from Israel. We are in the midst of a very intense and escalating conflict. So we do need your support today more than ever. Join conversations in the media. Don't be silent. Make sure that your friends and family are aware of what's going on. And I think that most of all, demand your leaders, state representatives, congresspeople, to take a stand, to take a bold stand, and to not just be the silent majority, to be the vocal majority that takes a stand and stands on the right side of history with the people of Israel against radical Islamists that seek to destroy and murder all of us.
Yeah. Well, Hananya Neftali, Israeli media influencer, thanks for joining us and giving your perspective of such a dark time here in Israel's history.
Thank you.
Well, a footnote to that interview, Hananya, like 300,000 of other Israelis have been called up to the front lines and now serving in the IDF. Well, joining us now is a great friend of CBN News and of Israel, Rick Ridings, founder of Sukkot Hillel, a 24/7 prayer ministry overlooking the Temple Mount. First of all, Rick, tell us your impressions, your heart, when you heard this happening on Saturday.
I think what grabbed my heart more than anything was as the stories began to come out, and we hear more of them because of our grandchildren here, the social media of what it was happening to the young people that were kidnapped and abducted, and the just horrific, barbaric, demonic things that were done to these who were abducted, and then using social media to get those images out to intimidate Israel. So this is unprecedented. There have never been that many Israelis killed in one day, as I know of, in any kind of war up until this point. And so people in the nations need to understand this is on a whole other level than what they've heard about with Hamas in the back.
Do you see this as a psychological battle, certainly a military and political battle, but a spiritual battle as well?
Yeah, definitely. I believe there's spirits of fear and intimidation that are being used here. They're trying to use these images to just provoke such a panic and such a fear into the Israeli people. So one of the ways we need to be praying is that God will give them a great grace and peace to cry out to God and to look to the Lord to take away the fear and to take away the panic and to be able to know what they need to do.
Yeah. What are some of the things you have felt from the Lord of how people should be praying right now?
Well, I feel this is a season. A few weeks ago, I put out a prayer perspective for the new year. And I said in that I believe there will be sudden storms. And these sudden storms are allowed by God to expose, but not just to expose roots of evil, but to uproot, just like a storm will uproot trees. And we proclaim scriptures about that, about his floods that will overflow places of lies. So there's a lot of deception and lying that has gone forth from groups like Hamas. And we're praying that this will just take the mask off of the demonic spirits that are working through Hamas, just like at a certain point ISIS began to show the true face of these demonic spirits. And we pray the young people of Gaza as well would be freed from that demonic hiddenness and see the evil for what it is.
Yeah, and there's been so many comparisons between what Hamas is doing and what ISIS did.
Yeah, just the same spirit.
Yeah, just a few times ago. So when you see all this and dealing with this, when you say uproot, it seems like Israel right now is committed politically and militarily, and the nation itself, to uproot Hamas. Is this pretty affirming exactly what you felt a couple of weeks ago?
Exactly. I felt this is not a time for a little surgical pruning, which what's happened with Hamas, they've been pruned many times, and then they just have more rockets the next time. This is an evil regime of corrupt, evil leaders. Actually, a few years ago, we could go to Gaza with a friend of ours who was helping children with heart problems come to Israeli hospitals and receive free care. And we drove after palace that belonged to corrupt political officials who were keeping people in these squalid camps to use them as PR to get more money to come in. So I believe it's time for this evil to be pulled out by the roots and not just allowed to crop back up again over and over.
What have you been hearing about people praying? My sense is that, and anecdotally, that so many prayer groups, so many home groups, and so many prayer ministries are really rallying around right now to pray. Is that what you sense as well?
Yeah, this morning, we just got back miraculously from Dubai last night. And when I came into the prayer room this morning, it was totally packed. And a lot of people left because of the war situation, but it was packed. And people were crying out to the Lord and weeping and proclaiming scripture and calling out. And I really believe this is a moment when we need to realize it's a key battle in this spiritual warfare for the survival and for the fulfillment of the promises of God to Israel.
Yeah. And have we gone to another level, not only politically and militarily and geopolitically, but spiritually as well?
I believe we're at a moment that's very special in Israel. I believe it's a moment where God, a few months ago, he said it would be almost like Gilgal. When Israel came across, God said, circumcise all the young men under 40. That was basically their army. So their whole army could not move, and they were facing Jericho, this giant city, and a huge army. And God put them in a place of total dependence and total weakness, and they called out to God. And he answered, and he brought down the walls of Jericho. I believe Israel, God has allowed to get to a point where they can't just do it in their own power. And that's why it's so important we in the nations are praying with them that they will cry out to God and receive divine wisdom in this situation.
Yeah. First of all, Rick, any final thoughts? And after any final thoughts, would you lead us in prayer?
Okay, just one final thought. I believe this is part of a larger global picture where I felt some time ago that when harvest would begin in especially some of the most difficult countries of the Middle East, which it is, in Iran, Afghanistan, places like this, that Satan would try to cut off the harvest through a premature World War III. And that he would try to do it by taking regional wars and conflicts and escalating them into a premature World War III. So I felt he said at that time, as war breaks out in one place after another,